Welcome back, everybody. I am now pleased to present Nan Roman from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Nan is a highly valued member of the NHC Board of Governors and has been a great friend and mentor to me as well. Thanks for working with us, Nan, to assemble this fantastic panel.
Thanks so much, David. Good to be here with you. We're certainly grateful for your leadership, David, and the critical work that you and the team at the National Housing Conference are doing, especially at this important time when our housing problems are so acute, but when we have really a significant opportunity, given the resources on the table, to do something about those problems. And homelessness is, of course, the extreme that proves the rule. It seems that the video is cut off, so I'm not quite sure if there's something.
Is your camera blocked, or is there a screen cover on your laptop?
No.
Oh, there it's improving. You move a little bit more to your right, maybe.
I've had that happen. There's like a little toggle at the top there.
Okay.
There you are.
Great.
All right.
Thanks. Take it from the top.
Okay. From the top, you couldn't, you want me to start again? Anyway, homelessness is the extreme that proves the rule in terms of housing. Notwithstanding the complexities, homelessness is essentially a housing problem. People become homeless because their incomes are too low to afford the housing that's available. And it's not unusual for people to think that homelessness is a personal failure, but at its core, it's a structural failure that's brought on by the nation's 7 million unit shortage of enough affordable rental units to house the low-income households that need those units. So it's really kind of a game of musical chairs, and often those with disabilities, those who have young children and so on, are the ones who are left out, the ones who become homeless. And of course, it's also the case that housing is the solution to homelessness, as people who are housed obviously are not homeless anymore. There are many more people with mental illness, criminal records, substance abuse disorders, very young children, older, disabled, many more people in those situations are housed than are homeless. It's not those things alone that cause homelessness, but rather the lack of affordable housing. However, there are significant new housing resources on the table that, if well targeted, could really make a dent in homelessness. And via House America, HUD, along with partners across the federal government, has set clear goals on what they expect communities to do with these resources to reduce homelessness nationally. And they have challenged mayors and governors and county and tribal leaders to set their own homelessness goals for those resources. You may recall that there was a similar challenge during the Obama administration, the mayor's challenge to end veteran homelessness, that ended up cutting veteran homelessness by half. So without further ado, let me introduce our terrific panelists to talk about House America, what it could accomplish, and how it's being implemented. First, we have Mayor Libby Schaaf. Mayor Schaaf is the 50th mayor of Oakland, California, where she has been a strong advocate for affordable housing and a determined innovator in addressing homelessness. She's also been a national leader on these issues, for which we thank her deeply. Prior to becoming mayor, she was a member of the Oakland City Council and an Oakland attorney. We also have with us Richard Cho. Richard is the senior advisor to the Secretary of HUD for Housing and Services. Prior to coming to HUD, Richard was the CEO of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. We're also very lucky to have Richard in a senior position at HUD, as he has a wealth of successful experience at the state and national levels, both around policy on this issue and practice. And finally, also joining us is Tasha Gray, Executive Director of the Homeless Action Network of Detroit, or HAND, which is the continuum of care for the city of Detroit. And so HAND really runs the homelessness system in that city. As such, Tasha has on-the-ground experience coordinating the work to end homelessness Prior to joining HAND, Tasha served as program manager for the Corporation for Supportive Housing, CSH. So welcome and thanks to all of you. And I'll ask Richard to kick us off by telling us about House America.
Great. Thank you so much, Nan. Thank you, David, and the National Housing Conference for including us today. I also want to give out a shout out to Mayor Schaaf. I'm probably not supposed to have a favorite mayor, but Mayor Schaaf, you're probably one of the top of the list. I want to talk to you a little bit about House America, and if I could ask for some help in pulling up the slides that we have. House America is an initiative that HUD has launched really in response to what we see as the crisis of homelessness, which has been moving in the wrong direction over the last several years. As Nan mentioned, we saw progress in reducing homelessness from 2010 to 2015. Great, if you can move on to the next slide. We saw progress nationally in reducing homelessness almost for all populations from 2010 to 2015. And that was even a time, as some of you may recall, when we were under budget sequestration in Congress. There were essentially no new resources other than for veterans to address homelessness. And yet we saw that the focus on evidence-based practices, efforts like the Mayor's Challenge to End Veteran Homelessness, and also just community effort to really use whatever available resources were there at the time strategically to connect as many people experiencing homelessness quickly into permanent housing, sometimes with wraparound services, was really key. And we were able to drive down homelessness for all populations, 11% overall, with steeper declines for veterans and for families. Over the last 5 years, however, prior to the pandemic, we've seen homelessness move in the wrong direction. An overall increase, steeper increases for those individuals who are not part of families, as well as those who are experiencing chronic homelessness, and also those that are sleeping outside. And even for veterans and families, while we saw somewhat declines in homelessness, they were less steep than we saw in prior years. This, I think, just contrasting these two 5-year periods shows that we know how to solve homelessness, but what it takes is a combination of resources. It also takes leadership and effective implementation to use resources to move people out of homelessness into housing. Next slide, please. Well, one of the reasons why we've seen declines in homelessness is because of really severe resource scarcity. HUD has looked at some of our data with respect to how much resources are available that turnover every year to provide housing assistance for different populations. What we find is that for veterans, the gap between the number of veterans who are homeless at any given time and the number of available vacant or available housing resources, whether vouchers or permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, the gap is pretty small for veterans. For families, the gap is somewhat larger, but also not quite as big. But for individuals that don't have dedicated resources, there's only enough available housing resources at any point in time to serve 1 out of 7 individuals who are experiencing homelessness at a given time. So it's no surprise that we've seen homelessness rise. And on the next slide, you'll see that one of the reasons why we've seen steady increases in homelessness nationally over the last several years. Actually, please skip to the next one. You can go 2 more. Okay. Well, one of the reasons is that the number of people who newly fall into homelessness is actually outpacing the number of people that we're able to successfully exit out of homelessness. Roughly speaking, over 900,000 people newly become homeless every year, and just a smaller number of that, so 900,000 or so on average, exit homelessness. And when more people fall into homelessness than are able to exit homelessness, that's when you see increases in homelessness. I'll try to fix my audio a bit. What we have this year through the action of the Biden-Harris administration, the American Rescue Plan was enacted that provides significant new resources to communities to address homelessness. And I'll go through those resources in a moment, but really I want to just contextualize just how significant these resources are. HUD was able to provide 70,000 emergency housing vouchers to communities, to public housing authorities and continuums of care to address homelessness. We also provided $5 billion in grants through the Home Investment Partnerships Program to help communities not only provide some short-term rental assistance, but really to actually build more affordable and permanent supportive housing to address homelessness. There's what is still available, but was provided $46 billion in emergency rental assistance that can help people avoid evictions, avoid losing their homes, or even to help people who have been displaced already or who are currently experiencing homelessness to obtain new housing. And also $350 billion in funds from the Department of Treasury through the state and local fiscal recovery funds to support a variety of needs to respond to the pandemic and negative economic impacts, including to respond to homelessness and housing instability. Just to put this into context, the HUD-VASH program, which many of you may be familiar with, the HUD-VA supportive housing program, it grew from about 8,000 vouchers in 2007 or 8 or so, and today now is at a scale of over 100,000 vouchers. But it took just about 15 years or so to grow that program from 8,000 vouchers to 100,000 vouchers. So think about the fact that we've now provided in a single year 70,000 vouchers to be able to address homelessness for all populations. And that just puts into context a little bit the scale of resources that are now available thanks to the American Investment Plan. So of course, next slide, please. We know that resources alone aren't, please skip this one actually as well, I'm sorry. Resources alone are not enough to address homelessness. We also need to be able to have the leadership in place to build the collaborations between all the different entities that administer those resources and programs locally, and also to set specific goals. We know that when mayors, as well as county leaders and governors and tribal nation leaders, when they set goals and when they manage to those goals, things get done. And so trying to harness that leadership and that ability for mayors to manage towards those goals is what really was the impetus behind House America. House America is an initiative that Secretary Fudge, along with other senior administration officials, launched in late September, which is an all-hands-on-deck effort to address the nation's homeless crisis. We are calling on mayors, county leaders, tribal nation leaders, and governors to partner with HUD to utilize these historic resources provided through the American Rescue Plan to make a real near-term reduction in the number of people experiencing homelessness. Specifically, I'm asking mayors and local and state leaders to set and achieve 2 goals. First, to rehouse a historic number of people from homelessness into stable housing using a housing first approach by the end of 2022. And second, to add additional new units of affordable and supported housing into the development pipeline by the end of next year. Collectively, what we hope to do nationally is to rehouse at least 100,000 people in that essentially 15-month time frame, as well as add at least 20,000 new units of permanent supportive housing or affordable housing into the development pipeline by the end of next year. Next slide, please. So I covered these goals. I'll go to the next slide. We launched this on September 20th with an initial set of mayors and local leaders. I'm really excited that Mayor Schaaf was among the very first leaders to raise her hand, along with many other county and local and state leaders across the country, governors from California to Maine, as well as mayors up and down both the West and East Coast, but also throughout the middle of the country as well, have joined and have set bold and ambitious goals, both with regard to rehousing and unit creation. What we are offering at the federal level, next slide please, is implementation support. And so in addition to tools and resources such as resources that our sister agency, the U.S. Interagency Council, has provided, we are also convening mayors and their staff on a monthly basis, an all-hands-on-deck call where we are allowing cities to be able to share some of their best practices and innovative strategies, as well as provide a direct line of assistance from the federal government to help troubleshoot, identify places where regulatory relief is needed, as well as to help just identify ways to kind of cut through some of the challenges that we often find to be able to use vouchers to rehouse people, as well as CARES Act funds, as well as to use home investment partnerships funds along with treasury funds and other state and local resources to be able to add new units to the pipeline. We're also convening regular office hours to respond to questions that come from House America's leaders, and also providing one-on-one technical assistance to communities as well. So the next slide, I'll just close by saying, You can find out more information at our website at hud.gov/house_America, including a link where you can submit information on how to get more information, as well as to, if you're a local elected official yourself and want to sign up, you can sign up there, as well as email us at houseamerica@hud.gov. And so with that, I'll turn this, I guess, back to you, Nan.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. And now I'll turn it over to Mayor Libby Schaaf to tell us a little bit about Oakland's participation in House America and some of the current initiatives that they have underway there. Mayor Schaaf.
Oh, thank you so much. It is so great to be here with some of my favorite housing heroes. In Oakland, we were excited to take up the House America Challenge. And our specific goal, and this is over just a 14-month period, is to move 1,500 people from homeless to housed, and to add 132 new extremely low income units. So this is not just affordable. These are units affordable to our most struggling, most vulnerable residents. And so that is our ambitious goal for these next 14 months. And what I want to say that I really love about this initiative is it is a silo busting powerhouse. It really is creating new relationships between the city and the housing authority and the county, or our continuum of care, in how we are bringing kind of our stone soup ingredients into this meal that we need to make to end homelessness. And so we are absolutely using those emergency housing choice vouchers that Richard talked about. Oakland is the recipient of 515 of those, and those are going to be helping us reach that $1,500 goal. But unlike traditional housing choice vouchers, instead of going off the list, these vouchers are going directly to people that we had temporarily put into FEMA-supported hotels because they were especially vulnerable to COVID. These are our homeless seniors, people with disabilities. And so these people who have been in these hotels are going to go to the front of the line to get permanent housing so that they do not go back out on the street as that FEMA support ends, as hopefully this pandemic becomes under control. We also in Oakland are very proud of several innovations that we've done to not only move people from homeless to housed, but to prevent people from entering homelessness to begin with. Keep Oakland Housed was a public-private partnership entirely privately funded by philanthropy 4 years ago that allowed us to build a system and a coalition of providers that for the first time were really digging into how do we prevent people from becoming homeless, really defining who is most at risk. And that is what we have found, a combination both of a previous experience of homelessness and that extremely low income. We've provided 3 things to them: legal support, case management, as well as one-time financial support, not just to pay back rent, but to create that self-sufficiency, that ability to sustain in existing housing. I always tell the story, and Nan, forgive me, I know you've heard it before, of one of our very first households that we helped. And I love this illustration because it reminds us that the only thing that homeless families or households have in common is the fact that they are without housing, that beyond that, they're all very unique. This was a developmentally disabled adult who was taking care of his very elderly mother. And when the house washing machine broke, he lost his job because he was unable to keep his uniform clean. So Keep Oakland House not only paid back the rent and the bills that were due, but also bought a new washing machine so he could return to work and stay stably employed and actually be self-sufficient. Just this week, we also launched a shallow subsidy or ongoing rental assistance program similar to Section 8, but at a lower subsidy level. Nan, you know I am hair on fire passionate about universal housing choice vouchers. And we believe that initiatives like House America and demonstration projects like the shallow subsidies that we are piloting here in Oakland will hopefully build a body of evidence and make the policy case that housing choice vouchers should go to all who qualify for them. In the state of California, only 13% of people who income qualify for Section 8 housing choice vouchers are lucky enough to receive one. Just let that sink in for a second. If you're poor, we don't make you enter a lottery to get food stamps or emergency medical care, but we do that with housing, a basic human need, the foundation for all other types of well-being. And so I really want to make the case that this is the time to really advance a vision for universal housing choice vouchers. And I'm hopeful that all the successes that House America is going to demonstrate will help us move to that moment. I also want to say that the emergency rental assistance that the federal government is giving through this kind of COVID response, Oakland was ready to incorporate that and move that money out quickly because we had already set up this Keep Oakland Housed coalition. And so again, I really want to recognize the power of public-private partnerships to create capacity so that when the public sector steps in to fund these types of interventions and supports for our most vulnerable, we are ready because we know the American people want to see results for those investments that you in the federal government are making. And I can tell you in Oakland, we've got plenty. Keep Oakland Housed has kept around 1,800 households a year from becoming homeless. And since COVID and the exceptional federal supports, that number has gone to well over 2,000 over the last year. So these are some of the things that we are doing in Oakland. We know that in a high cost area like the Bay Area, it's not just project-based vouchers that go with, it's not just housing choice vouchers that go with tenants. It is also project-based vouchers that allow us to construct and add the new units that are desperately needed. I'll end with this statistic about the Bay Area, just to underscore the point that, homelessness is really a policy failure, not a personal failure. That we have systemic problems. These are not the result of bad personal choices. Because it was just, in 2012 that 70% of Bay Area neighborhoods were affordable to households earning the median income. So if you earned the median income, the Bay Area was pretty affordable to you, almost the whole region. In 2018, that dropped to just 28%. And there is currently not a single zip code in the 9-county Bay Area that is affordable for someone earning the minimum wage. We've seen rents basically double over these last few years, and incomes remain the same. And in a place like the Bay Area, where we've added between 8 and 11 new jobs for every one unit of housing that we've built for the last 20 years, this is a systemic failure. Poverty and the widening gap between what people earn and what it costs to stay housed is driving homelessness. We cannot say that enough. We really must myth bust this idea of personal failure. And Oakland, California is so excited to be part of House America. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thanks so much, Mayor Schaaf. I'm going to steal that. Housing is a policy problem, not a personal policy failure, not a personal failure. And thank you so much. Great to see you and Thank you so much for all you're doing in Oakland and for your enthusiasm. And now we're going to turn it over to Tasha. She's going to give us a picture of how the COC works, the initiatives that are underway, and what the possibilities there might be for House America. Tasha.
Thank you, Nan. And thank you to my colleagues on the panel, Mayor Schaaf and to Richard Cho, some great information already. And so I want to just share with you from a COC perspective or the continuum of care perspective. So I am with the continuum of care in Detroit. And for those of you who may not be aware of the continuum of care, it's just the fancy term I like to say where HUD and the local community has designated our entity to really have oversight over homeless funding that are coming through HUD programs. And so one of the things that was mentioned earlier by Mayor Schaaf is the necessity of partnerships. And I can't underscore that more. And one of those partners that you don't want to overlook is the COC. And we know that a lot of these funds require the COC to be at the table anyways, but I want to encourage you to make sure that the COC is at the table and engaged in a meaningful way. Why? Because they have some of the resources and the knowledge that will really help to make this successful. Our COCs really have a pulse on homelessness. They know what's going on throughout the system locally, and they also know what's going on nationally. And they can help in programs such as House America, initiatives such as House America, to make sure that we're addressing not just what is happening nationally, but taking that national program like House America and making it work on a local basis. For example, one of the things that Richard Cho mentioned earlier was that nationally, the overall homelessness numbers are increasing, and some of that as a result of the pandemic. Well, here locally in Detroit, we're actually seeing an overall decrease in homelessness, which we're fortunate with that. However, there are certain populations such as youth and people experiencing chronic homelessness where we're seeing increases. And so when you bring the continuum of care in, they can help to take those national initiatives and really plan for what is happening locally. Another thing about the continuum of care and the partnerships is that, yes, housing is the solution to homelessness, but it also takes various partnerships to make sure that people not only are able to obtain housing, but to be able to maintain that housing. And so the continuum of care can be a partner there because oftentimes those relationships are already formed. We're working with various partners such as mental health agencies, substance abuse agencies, Department of Education, so on and so forth. And so those services that are needed and maybe not necessarily with the vouchers or with the affordable units, the continuum of care may be able to help in bringing some of those partnerships to life. Another piece of it is leveraging funding. Nan mentioned earlier, there are so many resources, and it's an exciting time to be in this field because my motto is, at some point, I want to work myself out of a job. And I feel like we have a lot of momentum and a lot of resources to be able to do that now. But we've got to make sure that we're leveraging those resources. And so what your continuum of care can do is help you to identify some of those resources, such as Emergency Solutions Grant, that may be able to cover a population that you were already intending to serve. And that way you can use your resources to cover other populations. And then I would say another key thing about having a continuum of care involved is really in the implementation and the design of things. Let them help you with designing the program. In our community, for example, vouchers alone while they help to end homelessness for us, we get a lot of times we have people coming back and saying, I have a voucher in my hand, and one, I can't find a landlord who will rent to me, or two, I can't find a unit that will pass inspection because we have a lot of older housing stock. And so in addition to having those vouchers, we also need the creation of affordable housing units in Detroit so that we can really tackle the problem of homelessness. And so that's some of the things that Continuum of Care can do. And then lastly, I would say is that whole measure of impact. And Mayor Schaaf spoke to this earlier too. You know, we want to set goals and we want to make sure that we're able to be bold with those goals and obtain those goals. And one of the things that the COCs can do is they have data that can not only drive where you put the resources, but then also measure the impact. They know where the gaps are in services. They know what's working well. They know what's not working well. And so make sure you're bringing to the continuum of care to the table for all of those reasons. And I would also say for a lot of these resources that are coming in through the House America, many of those are going to our partners such as PHAs and things of that sort. Well, with your continuum of care, make sure that you're also, to the extent you can, sharing some of those resources because they have costs too, and so that they can be at the table in a meaningful way as well. And I would say for my colleagues out there who are COCs, make sure you're at the table for all of the reasons listed above. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Nan.
Thank you so much, Tasha. Thanks again to all of you. You know, you talked about the numbers. I think HUD just released data not too long ago saying that the number of people who became homeless last year was down by about 10%. And, you know, that I think is somewhat due to, likely somewhat due to resources through the tax credits and the child tax credits, unemployment, bonuses for unemployment insurance and so forth that have really helped people stay in their housing during the pandemic. So we know about the things, we know that there are a lot of things that do work, and housing assistance is certainly one. Thank you all for setting the stage. I'm going to pose a few questions to you. If those of you in the audience have questions now as we go along, you could put them in the chat and hopefully someone will grab some out of there if we have time, and we can share those. But let me first ask Richard and maybe Tasha, why now? What about this moment do you think is so important to adopting the House America strategy? What makes it makes sense? Richard, do you want to start?
Sure, Nan. I mean, I think this is, there's no better moment than now. You know, part of me thinks back to the Obama administration when I was at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And at that time, as I mentioned, we were under budget sequestration. We were asking communities to reduce homelessness, but without any new dollars. And, you know, I think about what the impact we could have had back then had we had the resources that we have now through the American Rescue Plan. And by the way, you know, potentially significantly more resources if Build Back Better is enacted in terms of our ability to both address homelessness as well as build more affordable housing. And I think back, you know, if we had these resources in 2015, when the trajectory on homelessness was already going down, we would have made such great impact. You know, we're not in an ideal situation now. Homelessness is going up. We're still in the midst of a pandemic, and I know communities are juggling a lot right now, both to try to reduce homelessness while also protecting people experiencing homelessness from COVID-19. It is me. Can you all hear me better now? I want to try this without my my microphone. I would just say that you know, we have to set the national trajectory of homelessness back on a downward trend, and we have the resources on hand to do that. While I know that communities are exhausted, there is more challenges than we've ever had to deal with before. I don't know that we'll ever have a moment like this when you have both not only the resources of the American Rescue Plan, but also the support from a president who is talking about housing and homelessness. And it's been rare to have a president that talks about these issues. And you have a secretary who is determined to make progress on reducing homelessness. So you have the support in Washington. You have historic resources, potentially even more coming down the pipe. We need to, I think, really quickly put in place the kind of partnerships, break down the silos that Mayor Schaaf spoke about. Now, this is the moment now to begin kind of building that engine to be able to move as many people out of homelessness, as well as prevent new people from falling into homelessness now. Because again, this is the moment we have to set this trajectory. So we are counting on mayors like Mayor Schaaf and leaders across the country to take up that leadership, to take advantage of this moment, to set those goals that are needed to help communities rally, to give them the focus and to give them that kind of common North Star to really use these resources efficiently to bring as many people into stable homes. And I believe, and I know Secretary Fudge believes, that if we do that, we will see a reduction in homelessness like we've never seen.
Thanks, Richard. Tasha, did you have anything to add?
Those were some great responses. I too was thinking of the resources and the momentum that is happening right now. I think the only thing that I would add here is that, you know, if you think back in history, a lot of things, a lot of greatness comes out of crisis moments. And so we're in the midst of a global pandemic, almost 2 years now in the midst of a global pandemic. And so it's really a historical moment, but it's a crisis that has really opened our eyes to not doing things the way we've done them in the past. And so if nothing else, I think we can really have a vision, as Mayor Schaaf said this earlier, I think just having a vision for the future, because we can't continue to operate like we did pre-pandemic, now 20 months into it. So I think it's just an opportunity for great change.
Great. Thank you both. Looking back on I think Richard, you mentioned the mayor's challenge to end veteran homelessness during the Obama administration. Which was very successful. I think certainly in part similar to now, because there were a lot of new resources on the table with that. What lessons did we learn, both positive and negative, from that initiative that could inform our thinking about how to best take advantage of this initiative? Mayor Schaaf, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Two things. One, when you issue a challenge, couple it with resources and both money and technical support. And that's what you've done with this initiative as well. But that's also, we've seen what, a 70% cut in HUD resources since, was it the 70s? I mean, it really, the divestment from housing support from the federal government has been horrible. And so to start to reverse that is a big piece of the lesson learned. The other thing that I think worked really well with ending veteran homelessness, and this again gets back to our theme of silo busting, it was linking housing resources with social service resources. So VASH couples that housing support with the types of case management and mental health or addiction assistance that many people need to regain their housing stability and their independence. And I would love to see more of that built into our systems, as well as an ability to decouple them once someone doesn't need those services anymore, and we can move them on to someone who does.
Yeah, and you know, bringing up the question of services and how that worked then, of course, the mayor's mayor's challenge to end veteran homelessness was a healthcare system, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and a housing system, HUD, partnering with others, but both those pieces were there. You know, in terms of homelessness more broadly, though, we don't have that single source. States, most of the healthcare resources are vary by state. But maybe just for a second, Mayor Schaaf, again, I know you have partnered a lot with Kaiser and others in the region. What's worked there to get the healthcare sector on board? Because housing a lot of the people that we're concerned about, obviously, is going to take services, and we're seeing some pushback from PHAs, for example, that don't want to house high need people because they don't see the services attachment. How have you addressed that?
Well, you know, let's go back to housing first. Every piece of research shows that someone's health just improves tremendously once they have a roof over their head. And I wish that researchers, and if any of you are out there, please, would help us quantify that savings even more succinctly, because we know that once someone doesn't have that toxic stress in their life of being homeless, once they're getting a good night's sleep, even, people who we got into our cabin communities, which is kind of our new form of shelter. It's not congregate shelter. We're really moving away from that. We want people to have the 4 Ps: privacy, have their possessions with them at all times, be able to go to bed at night with their partners and their pets. We saw that just getting people into a very, very basic shelter system, but that had those 4 Ps, took blood pressure down, saw immediate health benefits. But we were able to layer in visits from the community health clinic, get people connected to a health home. So it's really layering those things together and being mindful. I think also, Nan, when I talk to my providers, they really feel buried. And Tasha, I'm sure you're going to start nodding with the paperwork. To have some more flexibility and allowing us to braid the need for housing supports and services together, having flexibility. Tasha, we're very lucky. We're a move to work jurisdiction for our housing authority. And so we've been able to put in like landlord incentives to get landlords to accept those vouchers, which can be really hard in the high cost, low supply Bay Area. So flexibility, we still want accountability for results, but flexibility, less separate programs. I feel like we have program-itis sometimes. So let's blend some of these different programs together with single applications and single reporting requirements, and provide some more flexibility for those of us who are happy to be held accountable for the results.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Richard, I know you were, of course, also very involved in that Mayor's Challenge to End Veteran Homelessness. Any observations or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I so much of what Mayor Schaaf is completely on point. And I think that was an example where, again, there were resources provided, but we needed that additional leadership and focus from local leaders to set the table. I remember Mayor Mitch Landrieu from New Orleans, who has now been named to help support the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure framework, the BIF. He really took to the Mayor's Challenge on Veteran Homelessness. And, I remember hearing from the Continuum of Care, Tasha, who was there in New Orleans, who said, it stresses us out because he calls us into his office every week to say, how are we doing on this Mayor's Challenge? What else do you need? But how are we doing? And it was that sort of constant accountability and pressure that Mayor Landrieu created that enabled New Orleans to become one of the first communities in the country to announce that they'd achieved the threshold. So that's sort of what the magic that we're trying to recreate in House America is, to have mayors across the country to set those goals, to create the accountability and build those partnerships, as well as provide the support needed to achieve those goals. I guess what was different is that, the Mayor's Challenge on Veteran Homelessness was a bit complicated, and it also was focused on a single population. I think we're at a point now where we've learned that when you prioritize one population over others, it tends to drive local efforts towards kind of fragmented approaches where resources get directed towards one population over another. And so we don't want a situation where we're reducing homelessness for one population at the expense of another. So House America is really an all population approach. Individuals, families, youth, we're seeing a growing cohort of seniors and people with disabilities. We want communities to prioritize those, as Oakland has, to focus on people who are most vulnerable, but to do so in a way that addresses homelessness for all populations. And I think that we now have maybe not all the resources we need, but significant more resources where we don't have to play those kind of cruel games. Sometimes it feels like a musical chairs game where there's not enough chairs for everybody, and so there's always going to be somebody losing out. We are building towards having enough resources where we don't have to have that musical chairs game, where we can address homelessness for all populations. Again, emergency housing vouchers, but also significant ESG CARES Act funds that still are available that can be used as rapid rehousing or even bridge rental subsidies, or even landlord incentives. Again, the Treasury, state and local fiscal recovery funds, $350 billion I know there's a lot of other uses that are being considered for those, but one of those can be to build more affordable and supportive housing. Can also be used to acquire properties quickly and bring on new housing online, and using HUD as the permanent financing takeout source. And I'll say, Mayor Schaaf, when I got to visit Oakland and went to Clifton Hall, you found a vacant college art college dormitory. And from, I believe from acquisition to occupancy, it took 6 months to take that empty dorm and convert that into permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. That's an unprecedented timeline to be able to bring on new housing to address homelessness. That's the kind of innovation that we'd love to see. That's the kind of innovation that we hope happens everywhere. And that's what we're hoping to unleash through Housing Method. So Nan, I'll just say, we're borrowing a lot of the pages out of the Mayor's Challenge to End Better Homelessness playbook, but we're learning from that to know that we need to have an all population approach, and that we need to both focus on rehousing people as well as building additional new housing for the future. Because we're also in a time when vouchers alone, rental assistance, it's challenging to use that in this really complicated rental market. And so we also are added to the House America goals, a unit creation goal, so that we can add more longer term affordable and permanent supportive housing into the pipeline that can actually serve people experiencing homelessness in the future.
Thank you so much, Richard. That's right. And it also just brings to mind that in addition to all the resources, another opportunity that we have just weirdly at the moment is the strange real estate market, which for the most part is not that great for the things we're trying to do. But on the other hand, there are these vacant hotels, motels, commercial property, retail property that's available at the moment. And there's some, as you said, Richard, there's some capital on the table in the current bills, but if we get to the Build Back Better, if we have time to get to that, there's more also there. So that is a huge opportunity that we haven't had before, and to move so fast, so much faster than we typically do. Tasha, have any thoughts about how there are a lot of course, the very best mayors are already involved in House America, but there are these straggling mayors out there apparently that aren't signed up yet. So any thoughts about what COCs or housing organizations or others can do to get their mayors involved?
Sure. Well, I would hate to refer to our mayor as a straggling mayor, so I won't, but I will say that I have been thinking about this because our mayor has not signed on yet. And so I think really what the COCs can do to get mayors involved is, one, really paint the picture about the historical aspect of this funding. I know in the years that I've been working in homelessness, I've never seen resources like this before. I was around when there was funding from the Obama administration through the HPRP program and things of that sort. I was around for those days, but I've never seen the commitment that we're seeing right now. And so it's most mayors and most political figures want to be involved in historical things. And so I think there's really an opportunity for us to really just kind of paint that picture. I also just would say really letting the mayor know how much their political will causes for, I think Richard Cho mentioned this earlier, it's that visibility that can bring additional resources, but it also brings accountability. And so we know things like the Mayor's Challenge on Veteran Homelessness actually worked. It had impact. And so if we can point to some of those things, I think we can get our mayors on board. And I think the other thing is, the resources are coming whether they sign on or not. And so why not put together a strategic plan and some goals to really make sure that we have impact?
Yes. Mayor Schaaf, and do you have any thoughts to add on what would get your colleague mayors involved in this? How should we pick them?
I'll be honest, Tasha kind of touched on it. I would say that's part of the issue. The resources are coming whether you sign on to the challenge or not. And so one thing that HUD might think about is to have a special resource that only comes to the mayors that sign on, whether that's a competitive innovation grant or something that actually is extra that rewards people for signing on. Because I think it's been a very overwhelming time to be a governmental leader. Let's just be honest. And our, navigating through the ARPA funds and the economic recovery and the different health orders, it really has been pretty overwhelming. So I think, a little bit more of a tangible carrot could help. I will say, though, I've been really inspired by being the co-chair of something called Mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment. And it started pre-pandemic, but I'm really proud that it is a bipartisan group of mayors. My co-chair is the Republican mayor of Mesa, Arizona, John Giles, and he is a fabulous champion on the issue of housing and homelessness. And to see the business community step forward and really care about homelessness, they see this both as an economic issue and a moral imperative. So I just believe that the desire to end homelessness is something that can actually bring our increasingly polarized nation back together. It really has so much that is core to who we are as Americans. So I think to just bring that out, and I know that I will do a better job of trying to make sure that every member of mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment is part of the challenge.
That's great. Thank you so much. So Richard, Build Back Better is, who knows what's going to happen, but we're all feeling optimistic about that and hopeful. And that is poised to make, ramp up even more the historic investments in housing and homelessness. How do you think we can, those funds will be able to best be used to achieve the goals of House America and to make even more progress?
Nan, that's a great question. I am feeling confident that we will have this Build Back Better enacted. Is what America needs more than anything in terms of having an America that actually works for working families. That's really what Build Back Better is about. And in addition to significant investments in childcare, affordable healthcare, in care for seniors and people with disabilities, there's also historic resources to scale up housing investments to both build new affordable housing across the country, to preserve affordable housing and public housing, as well as to address homelessness. One of the specific provisions of this that will, I think, carry the momentum of House America if it's enacted as the $24 billion in tenant-based rental assistance, $24 billion in more vouchers, of which $7 billion is intended for people experiencing or at risk of homelessness, including those fleeing domestic violence. Essentially very identical to the emergency housing vouchers in terms of the population focus and the way that these vouchers would work. To put $7 billion into context, the emergency housing vouchers we provided to the American Rescue Plan, that was $5 billion. It bought 70,000 vouchers. So $7 billion will buy more than 70,000 vouchers, 80, 90,000 vouchers, let's just say. That is, again, even more historic resources to be able to help with the address the near-term issues of homelessness, as well as more affordable housing. And I'll say some of that affordable housing, I hope, will go to people who are currently experiencing homelessness, but also to just address the broader affordable housing crises that continues to affect inflow. We discussed earlier, 900,000 people every year newly become homeless. And so, we're sort of bailing out of the bathtub as it keeps getting filled up with more water. And so we need to both move more people out of homelessness into housing, but also close the faucet off by just having enough affordable housing in this country so that people aren't as vulnerable to homelessness in the future. I think Build Back Better, if it's enacted, I think it can really help us to make progress in reducing homelessness. And I think restore the public's faith that homelessness is not an intractable problem. I know when Mayor Schaaf in the West Coast, people lose faith in the public that homelessness is something that is solvable. And yet, there are countries, cities across the country that have reduced homelessness. And as I showed before, from 2010 to 2015, we saw, modest but still reductions in homelessness. I think we can get there. I think we can go even further in reducing homelessness. And if we can couple that with a homelessness prevention strategy where the healthcare sector, the criminal justice system, those feeder institutions that lead people into fall into homelessness can have greater accountability for addressing homelessness before it happens, along with the kind of innovative ideas that the City of Oakland is pursuing, where we're looking for people who are vulnerable to homelessness or housing loss, and we're actually trying to provide prevention assistance. Those are the kind of ideas that we need, coupled with aggressive efforts to rehouse people. I think like we can actually put homelessness behind us and achieve the vision that the President and Secretary Fudge have, where homelessness does not exist in a country as great as the United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot in that bill too that's not housing focused, as you're saying. And there's a lot, you know, in the housing focus or the housing resources. They're also project-based. Mayor Schaaf, you mentioned project-based vouchers. That's in there. 811s, 202s. You know, there are a whole range of different kinds of vouchers to help different people with different needs, and also to prevent and homelessness. There are really a lot of resources in there that could help. Mayor Schaaf, someone asked a question about Oakland, the NIMBYism. You know, it seems in California, or at least is what we're hearing, you know, there's a sort of an increase in NIMBYism. A lot of people on the street, people in encampments moving into neighborhoods. Not a pretty picture in terms of the neighbors or the people who are living in encampments. What have you found that's worked to help with addressing the NIMBYism?
Well, I'm very proud that in California, we have a growing movement of YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard. And so there really has been this grassroots rising up of people that are actively countering the NIMBYs. So it's a lot of young professionals, a lot of progressives that really think things like single family home zoning should be done away with, really recognizing the racially discriminatory origins of that policy. I'm proud to say Oakland has not had the same kind of problems that even San Francisco has had with regard to killing great housing projects. Nan, you talked about the old college dormitory that we converted into permanent supportive housing. And it is in a really fancy neighborhood, a very high cost neighborhood with lots of restaurants and a great public school. It is a few blocks from our transit stop, our BART station. So it's a very high opportunity neighborhood. And I have to tell you, the neighbors actually made welcome baskets for the new residents to welcome their new neighbors. Now, I can tell you not every community is like that, but I feel very blessed that in Oakland, there is a lot of compassion. I will say this though, and this is the other side of being a mayor, the presence of encampments in public parks, blocking sidewalks, and in commercial neighborhoods is creating a tension. The impacts of these encampments where people are without sanitation services is a real impact. And I do worry how much we are testing the compassion of our residents, and that we really must work with all speed and diligence and keep that belief going that this is absolutely solvable. Because I do worry that people at some point are going to turn back to the concept of criminalization, something that we, I think, have moved away from, but I am really worried about that. I want to be honest. The last thing I'll say about California is we could use a little CEQA reform. And one thing that the federal government could do that we have done in California, and it's made a huge difference. I mean, Nan, you talked about that 6-month turnaround. That would not have been possible if California did not exempt these types of homeless housing projects from the environmental review process. And the federal government could do the same thing with NEPA. So if you have, it's urban infill, it's not going to have a big environmental impact. To take that regulatory hoop away would make a big difference in the speed and the cost of new homeless interventions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we have this remarkable inflow of resources, but there is so much that we just put up, so many barriers that we've put up to being able to take as effective use of those resources as we could. So much blocking things. And but it feels like it's moving in the right direction, and we have a lot of support from the administration on that. Well, we haven't gotten to half the questions, and we're done. Our time is up, but I just want to extend my sincere thanks to Mayor Schaaf, to Richard Cho, and to Tasha Gray, all fantastic advocates in the community and nationally, and people that I've enjoyed working with. So wonderful to see you all again. And thanks so much to NHC for inviting us here to have this discussion. And I'll turn it over now to David.